Welcome back to Product Perspectives for this episode about growth, which is one of the hot topics in product. I've talked to Ken Rudin, who is the SVP of User Growth at ThoughtSpot, a modern BI solution which I use as part of my current role. Ken Rudin is the SVP of User Growth at ThoughtSpot, leading product-led growth initiatives across the company, increasing user acquisition and engagement. Previously, he led the global user growth and analysis team at Google, where he focused on driving user acquisition, engagement, and monetization across all Google products and services. His team provided analysis, best practices, tools, and services to optimize Google's products as well as marketing campaigns, resulting in accelerated growth in users and revenue. Prior to Google, Ken built the analytics organization at Facebook, which included both the data science teams and the data engineering teams. He led the organization to deliver high-impact analysis across all Facebook products. And before that, Ken was also the VP of Analytics and Platform Technologies at Zynga, helping Zynga become known for excellence in analytics and helping to build the foundation for one of the world's largest social gaming platforms. In this episode, Ken explains how he's helped companies transition from a traditional sales-led model to product-led growth with some real-world examples. I've enjoyed learning about his journey into product and the data world, as well as his clear explanation of how core PMs, growth PMs, and product marketing can work together to make great, successful products. This episode is a bit longer than usual, but it is worth it, so I hope you enjoy the listen. Thank you very much, Ken, for being with me today. I'm very excited to have you because I work with your company. We are a customer of ThoughtSpot. And I thought first, before we go into the details of what your role is about, if you give me in a few sentences some details about what ThoughtSpot is, what's the product, and what is the value.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for being a customer, and thank you for inviting me to your podcast. ThoughtSpot is business analytics product. So think of Tableau or Power BI. Those are kind of the classic BI solutions. And we fall into a more modern BI category where our product is built for everyone in the company, not just analysts or data scientists. The classic tool was built for analysts. Ours is built for everyone so that everyone has access to information without needing to rely on an analyst for absolutely everything. And the way we do that is it uses a familiar search-based interface powered by AI. So think of it as Google for your data, where you can type into a box the question you have about your data, and the search result that comes back is charts and graphs. So this means that business users can answer their own questions themselves, and that in turn means that the analysts, using the same interface, can focus their time on identifying real deep business insights and business opportunities instead of always having to tweak some dashboard for someone or create yet another report.
Right. I love the analogy of Google for data. That's a really good message. And I've been a BI analyst myself in the past, so I know what it's like when you have lots of queries and you have a whole backlog of things to do. And as a product manager now, I don't have time to deal with that. So I want the data and I want answers to my questions. So I totally get the value. So let's talk about your role now. So you're SVP of User Growth at ThoughtSpot. So effectively, you are leading the product-led growth there.
Yes.
Can you give me some examples of initiatives that your team has led?
Yeah, sure. My role in the company when I came in was to lead a new product-led growth initiative for the company, which is it's a whole company strategy change. We were traditionally the classic B2B sales model, having sales development reps who were calling prospects and setting up meetings with account execs who were then going through a sales process, going through demos and proof of concepts to a closed in one customer. What I have focused on is how do we shift that so we can become product-led growth, where the product does a lot of the initial work. So by the time a salesperson is speaking with one of these prospects, they are much more qualified than what we've been able to do historically because they are much more aware of the product. So one of the first things my team focused on, which we didn't have at the time I got started, was some form of free trial. So how could we enable our product so that someone in a very self-service fashion, without requiring them to talk to us or without requiring additional resources from us, anyone who wants to can sign up for a free trial, and we would walk them through the process. How do you very quickly configure it so that they can quickly get to some value? I mean, historically, these systems, BI systems, have taken many weeks or months to configure. And our initial design goal was, how do we get them to the point where they're getting actual insights within 30 minutes? And it was interesting. People really inside the company were a little bit skeptical, or at least some were, because they thought, these are complicated products. Historically, they have been. And, all B2B products take a lot of setup, and you need professionals to help them do the setup. How are we going to do this self-service? But we were able to tackle the problem iteratively, and we were able to launch the free trial, which has now been one of the best ways we're generating qualified leads. That was like a big strategic change. I can also talk about some more direct and tactical examples. Like, let's see, this is something we're about to launch. We were looking at the people who would register for the free trial. You go to the website and you sign up, and then they fill out a form, click, submit, and that's their registration process. They would receive an email with a link to now go log in. And they would then set up the password and log in. What we noticed through the data, and this is very much what product-led growth is about, or just growth in general, the growth process, where you start with data, looking for opportunities, and then come up with a hypothesis about what you can do to improve on whatever metrics and data you analyzed. And then you run experiments to see if your hypotheses about moving that metric were correct. So one of the things we found when we were looking at what percentage of the registrations were actually then logging in, I guess unsurprisingly, about 30% of the people who register, they give us their email address, and not a bouncing email. These are ones where they actually received it. About 30% of the people who took the time to give us that personal information don't ever log in. So we're doing all the work to get them to the website and get them to sign up, but they're not going through the final steps. And when you look at the process, there are several steps along the way. They have to fill out the form. They have to receive the email. They go to their inbox. Maybe it went to spam. We try and avoid that, but maybe it did. Or they see an email from their boss and they respond to that one, and then they forget about our email. Or they go to the website and they have to create a password, and several of them create a very, very simple password, which we'll tell them, no, you need to have something that is more secure, and they'll give up at that point. There's about 5 steps literally along the way. And so our hypothesis was we need to be able to get that 30% drop off. How would we get that to 0? And so what we're rolling out now is signing up with Google, where, it's something you've seen commonly, but it will address a very big pain point for us right at the top of the funnel. Now with a single click, you don't have to get an email. You don't have to fill out a form. You don't have to create a password. With a single click, you are in. So 100% of the people who click sign up with Google will get into the product. So that's another example of something that, product-led growth does, where we're looking at data, where are there fall-off moments, and then how do you improve that?
What I take from your second example is basically all the methods that we would use in B2C. Some of them can actually work in B2B.
Yeah, I think that is absolutely correct. My prior company, I was at Google. I led the growth function for Google. And I started with all the Google consumer products. And most of the products that Google has are the consumer products like YouTube and Chrome and so on. And then about 3 years into my role at Google, we started looking at, can we do this for Google's B2B products? Google Ads and Google Cloud were the 2 big ones. And at first it was like, no, these things, like you just said, these things are really just for individual consumers. But we ran as just some internal tests. Can we apply some of those things that work for consumers? Can we apply them to a B2B product, an enterprise product? And the answer was a resounding yes. The same approaches, maybe you tweak them a little bit, but for the most part, the same approaches work. And then the understanding we took away from that was it's because at the end of the day, you are a person sitting in front of your computer. And so what motivates you to do something and what simplifies something for you with consumer products will also motivate you to do things and simplify things for you if it's an enterprise product, because you're still the same person. So that was one of the reasons I really wanted to join ThoughtSpot, to take all of those things that people have learned about driving growth in consumer products and apply it to something I'm very, very passionate about, which is enterprise analytics.
Right. And you've touched on that. So you worked at Google before. So can you walk me through your journey?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a twisting and turning journey over the years. And I have had the good fortune of working at a lot of different companies, although some people would say that that's because I can't keep a job in any one company very long. But I'll leave that to others to decide. I started off as a programmer, and I was actually a programmer at Oracle, working in the core database team. And this is really where I got introduced to the concept of databases. I didn't know that much about it before I started working there. And then Oracle, this was a few decades ago, Oracle started working on what are we going to do for this new data warehousing trend that was becoming popular at the time. And so I became product manager for the data warehousing division, the product leader for the data warehousing division at Oracle when it was first created. And that's where I really got to learn about data warehousing and BI and analytics in general. And the public secret, I guess, as I phrase it, I have spent most of my career in and around analytics, but I actually have no formal training in it. So it was through the generosity of others who've been willing to teach me the basics that I have been able to learn and have a few successes along the way because of that. From my experience there at Oracle, I met a gentleman named Mark Benioff, who I worked closely with there. And he had just left to create this company called Salesforce. And I had a dinner with him once. This was back in like 1999, right when he had just started the company. And he sold me on the idea. And I joined Salesforce as the head of the product org there. And what I really learned there, whereas at Oracle, I learned about analytics because I started leading the data warehousing group. At Salesforce, the big thing I learned about is the value of being able to see how people use your product, the data you could get that we could never see before. This was a software as a service product. You know, it was all running on your own servers. So you can look at and understand where are people being successful, where are they getting stuck. And then because I was inspired by this software as a service model, I left Salesforce after a few years and then started my own software as a service company for analytics called Lucidera. We were a little early at the time. This is even before Amazon and AWS. Well, Amazon was around, but AWS was not around. So we had to build our own data center. So we had, I would say, medium level of success. We were able to sell the company. I didn't get to do everything I wanted to do with it. And after that, I went to Zynga, the gaming company, and led analytics there. And that was the first time I really learned about how to use analytics to drive growth. We really were tracking all of the information about how people were using the games and what was seen as engaging and what wasn't. And from Zynga, I then went to Facebook, as I mentioned. That was the first time we had a formal growth team, and I just loved that it was a combination of kind of product and analytics all mixed together, and that was growth. And then after that, I had the opportunity to lead the growth team at Google. So that's my lots of turns and twists. But at each company, I learned something new that has kind of built on what we've done before, whether it was about analytics or the value of user data or what the growth process is overall. It's just been fascinating.
Great. That is a very impressive career. And I want to touch on the differences that you've seen along that journey a bit later. But for now, you talk about growth, and we hear more and more growth PMs, needed. And I don't exactly know how we call the other like normal PMs. I know you said core PM.
I call them core PMs, yeah, which, they're doing the core PM work, the work that we've always done. And the other kind of PM I call is growth PMs.
Okay. So can you clarify what is the difference between a core and a growth PM?
Sure. Core PM is the type of product management that we've understood, and it is still absolutely critical. So I'm not at all saying that that's the old way and you need to do the new way. It is absolutely critical. My take on it is, but it is only a piece of the puzzle, a critical piece, but it's still by itself, you're missing another piece. What core focuses on is it's focused on adding new functionality to a product so that you're adding more value into the product that users can use. And the focus of a core PM is launches. We're going to build new functionality and we're going to launch it so that users can use it. And the process that they follow is build and launch. Then you check that item off the list because you built it and launched it, and you go to the next item on your roadmap and it's build and launch. So you're led by a roadmap, building and launching things on that roadmap, adding more value into the product. The big difference between that and what a growth PM does is whereas a core PM is focused on launches, I always say that growth PMs are focused on landings. So what I mean by that is just because we put a feature into a product that potentially adds more value to users, it doesn't mean that the users are actually realizing that value. It doesn't mean they're actually using that feature. Or it doesn't mean that they're using it as frequently as we had hoped that they would use it. So there have been some studies done historically that 80% of all feature launches don't live up to the expectations in terms of usage and impact. And when you take a step back, it seems kind of obvious to me why that's the case, because we built something. It was our first iteration ever, and we put it out there. And so it doesn't work as well as we had wanted it to because this was our first attempt. But what do? As an industry, we then say, great, it's launched. Okay, on to the next thing. So we've launched it, but the value is out there, but the value has not landed with the users. So that's where growth comes in. Growth is all about how do you take things that are already in the product and optimizing the functionality. So rather than adding new functionality, it's about optimizing functionality. Rather than focusing on launches, it's focusing on iterations so that we can land that functionality and actually deliver the value to the users. And rather than having this mindset of build and launch based on a roadmap, this is you do analysis, and then you run an experiment based on that analysis, and then you iterate. So it's analyze, experiment, iterate. And it's not based so much on a roadmap. It's more based on analyses and moving metrics.
Great. I think that is the clearer explanation I've ever had. So thank you very much for this.
Glad it was understandable. I think that's the high-level way to describe it. And where I say that core PM is critical, but it's only a piece of it. The piece that's missing is where the growth PM comes in is how do you make sure that all those features you have released are getting used? Now, you could say, well, shouldn't that be the role of a core PM? They built something, shouldn't they ensure it's getting used? And in a perfect world, absolutely. But the reality is the way we've been structured and so on, if you give somebody the task of A, launching new features, and you've got pressure and timelines for that, and B, going back to things you've already launched and iterating on them to move metrics, the latter one just doesn't happen. Unless it's somebody's full-time job, we focus on PM as, did you get the feature out? And that's just the reality. So the growth function and growth PM has formed to be someone to actually focus on this. When I was at Google, we did initially start by having everybody do a little bit of growth work. And we essentially got no growth work. And instead, we took a small group of people and said, these women and men are really focused on, they really get growth, they really are excited by it, have them focus 100%, a very small team, like 5 people. We got so much more done than when we had 100 people all trying to do it part-time.
Yeah, so I think it's a question of capacity. Like I don't have the time as a PM to do it all. So yes, we need another person. Is there something around skills as well? Can a core PM transition to growth, or do they need a particular set of skills?
I think almost every growth PM started as a core PM. So the evidence points to, yes, you can transition. I think the big difference in skill sets is the growth PM is a little less focused on generating innovative new product features and is more focused on analysis, data and analysis. So a growth PM is a combination of a core PM and an analyst.
Right. And what's the role of product marketing in that then?
I think what product marketing, the companies I've worked at and just what I'm most familiar with, what product marketing does is they get the message out to people to get them to understand what the product does and understand why they should be considering the product and why they should be, what the benefits are. So they're basically working on more the top of the pipeline, first of all, which is they're focused on how do we get people, if we're talking about a free trial, how do we get people into the free trial? And whereas core marketing would focus on, SEO and things like that, product marketing would focus on what's the messaging that's going to resonate with people. That's the first thing that product marketing does. The second thing that's an evolving role for product marketing is not doing acquisition-focused marketing, or not only doing acquisition-focused marketing, but also doing engagement marketing. Since we want to not just get our users, but we want to keep them and we want to continue to drive engagement, marketing can also help with that. So the engagement campaigns, you see a lot of these drip email campaigns, for example, when you sign up for a product, and they'll tell you about, you'll get an email every week based on what either you have or have not yet done in the product, nudging you to try different things, use it in different ways so you're experiencing different use cases and so on. I think that's what product marketing can do. They can help with the nudges when you're not in the product. And what the product growth people are doing is driving engagement when you're in the product, and product marketing is driving engagement when you're not in the product to get you back in.
Right. Thank you. I think that we help people in product marketing because over the previous interviews I've done, it's still unclear, I think, for people in product marketing where they're going to sit in that new product-led world.
Yeah, I mean, I think the big change that they should be thinking about is not just how do you focus on acquisition and the messaging associated with that, but engagement and retention for people who are already customers, particularly as these new models are subscription models. Keeping someone becomes often the biggest driver of a company's success versus acquiring them. Because if you acquire them and then you quickly lose them, all of your acquisition is just not really for growth. It's for replacing the people you lost and, just to keep you flat. So that's not the right way to grow.
Great. So I want to go back to your role at the moment. So how do you work with growth product managers and how do you work with core product managers?
Great. Yeah. And I will say up front that in all companies that I've been at and any other growth people that I speak with, there is always a little bit of tension when you create a growth product team, because as I said before, yes, you've launched the feature and in most cases, you're not actually going back and iterating on it. So isn't it great to have another team focused on doing that? In theory, that sounds great, but still people are like, but that's my feature. I don't want you messing around with my feature and changing it and so on. So there is always a little bit of friction there. But the way we are structured and the way most companies that I know of are structured is in the product org overall. We are part of the product org. In the product org overall, there are different product teams that own different areas of the product, and they are responsible for all of the functionality related to that product area. So in my group, there's the visualization team that present the charts and graphs that you're looking at. There's the team that builds the infrastructure to connect to different data sources, and there's the query engine team and so on. They all own different parts of the product. We are also structured as one of those product teams. So we have analysts in our team, we have designers, engineers, and PMs like the other product teams do. The difference is our charter isn't a single area of the product. Our charter is product wide. And we start by looking at data and figuring out where there are opportunities that we think we can move important metrics. And then what we do, and this is where you just have to build a good working relationship. Almost everything we do, there are a few exceptions that I can talk about, but almost everything we do is in an area that some other product team owns. So almost everything we do, therefore, is a collaboration with them. And we bring our own engineers to whatever initiative we're working on, but we didn't write the code, so they did. And so whereas we don't require them to do all of the work, it is a requirement that they help us because they know the code. So they have to first trust us that we're not going to screw anything up. And B, they do have to commit some amount of their time to at least help us understand what we need to change. And the more it's focused on front end things and the more that it can be a totally self-contained project, the more we can do the work with less of their input, the more it tends to be infrastructure and back end, the more collaboration we need with them. But that's how we work with them. And as long as you're open with them, it works pretty well. I'd say the biggest challenge is because it is required that they collaborate with us. They often feel that they don't have the bandwidth to even do that they have a full roadmap that they have to deliver on. And so the way around that is you have to, I think product managers going forward, even core product managers, all product managers need to be focusing less on what they're launching as their measurement of success and more on metrics. Why are we launching this thing? What metric are we trying to improve? And so the reason that that's really helpful, so for all of our product teams now, they have success metrics. And you're not really done until you've moved those metrics. So now if we look at something and we'll say, hey, we have this insight and several hypotheses about how we can move this particular metric. We see that there's a gap here. Like you're supposed to get a certain percentage of people to log in and it's at 70%. Your target is 85%. We believe that by implementing sign in with Google, we can change that. We can do a bunch of the work, but we're going to need to collaborate with you because you guys are in charge of the registration process overall. Now we're much more aligned. It's not you just added something to my roadmap, which I hadn't scheduled for. Now you're helping me reach my goal of hitting my success metric. So it just helps us get much more aligned. It's not a panacea for everything. There's still always going to be issues of, something critical just came up. We don't have time for this. That's kind of a natural challenge that you always have to work through. But by aligning on success metrics and by starting with data and showing the data as there's a great opportunity to improve this area of your product, and just by being very open with them and only doing stuff, with their blessing, so they learn to trust what you're doing, it works out very well.
Yeah, I think the positioning of this new role of growth product manager is very important because if you just say, okay, we're going to tweak your features to make them better because they're not good enough. And by the way, we're going to ask you for some help to do this because we don't know the code base. It's not going to go well.
That does not work. Yeah. If you just start messing around with their things, they would get very annoyed. And it's not, as you said something very important there that we're going to fix it because you didn't build it right. Or you didn't build it, it's not good enough. Obviously, anyone's going to react negatively to that. The notion is, and this is where we start with data, saying we're seeing that there's a 30% drop off. We think we can reduce that. And it's nothing about, I can't believe you built something where there's a 30% drop off. It's, we've seen this as a gap. We think we can improve it. And, our job is to help you find these areas because we spend more time in analysis than the other product teams. They all do their own analysis. That's one of the things I really like about working at ThoughtSpot. And we use our own product to do that, where every designer, every engineer, every product manager is doing their own analysis on their own functions. But we do things more at a global level, and we can see we will identify opportunities that they hadn't come across. So it's by using the data, you can approach it in a very non-threatening way.
Yeah, I can tell that as a product manager, I try and push for MVP. So yes, I understand it's not optimized. The person where I think will be most likely frustrated is my designers in general. They are the ones frustrated when I cut the corners on the design and all of this. And then knowing that somebody else is changing, it's essentially the user experience. I think most of the time, the flow that can be a bit frustrating. So involving, I guess, the UX designer who's been on the initial design would help to also understand.
Yeah, and if you do that, they are often the most grateful, because all designers start with a really, really good design, and then somewhere along the way, bits and pieces of it get cut, and the final product is not as elegant as they had hoped. So we can come back to them with hey, we're actually trying to iterate and give it more polish and more refinement and make it much more of an elegant experience. That's something that they are really eager to do from a designer standpoint.
Great. One part I wanted to go back to is your experience in different companies. So you've led the user growth and analysis team at Google, the analytics organization at Facebook, and Salesforce and all of this. So what differences do you see between your role in those different organizations?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. Like I'll look at Facebook versus Google versus ThoughtSpot, the three most recent roles I've been in. Facebook, my actual function was to lead the global analytics function for the company. And I worked very, very closely with the product team. And I was a member of the growth team. That's what analytics reported into. So I saw a lot of how can we focus on improving the product. That was a lot of what we were focused on. The big challenge actually when I came in the first 6 to 9 months was Facebook had a ton of data, as you can imagine. They didn't have a focused analytics team. They had some analysts that had been hired into different organizations. And so there was one analyst here and 2 analysts in this other part of the company and so on, doing their own independent, separate things in completely different ways. So depending on who you were talking to about how many X's did we have last week and how many times did somebody do Y, last month, you'd get very, very different answers. Even answers to the question like, well, how many users did we have last month? We'd get different answers, and it's not because people were doing it wrong. It was things like, well, when you say who's using Facebook, do you mean somebody who just logged into Facebook? Or there were all kinds of tools that would allow you to post to Facebook and Twitter at the same time. Somebody who does that, is that a user? They never actually logged in and used our UI, but they used the tool and posted something. So we had all of these issues, and the biggest challenge I had was they didn't trust the data. We had so much data and it wasn't being used. So the focus there was, how do we get people to trust the data? So I spent the first 6 or 9 months just saying, what is a small amount of data that we can essentially certify? We want to centralize it. We want to certify it. So, here's the 40 most commonly used tables. There were tens of thousands, literally, because people would just create whatever they felt they needed. But we were going to take our user table and our actions table and things about the social graph, and we were going to just certify that. And then we launched some analyses and some data sets, and we basically said, we will stand behind this. So as long as you use these certified tables, it doesn't cover everything you want, but this is data you can use. So that's how we got around that challenge there. It was really about getting people to trust the data. When I was at Google, my role there was leading a growth function. And that was also really hard. I guess I somehow get myself into positions where I have to change something about culture in a company, which can be really painful, but if it works, it's really gratifying. So at Facebook, they had a lot of data. They weren't using it. And how do we get people to trust the data and start using it? At Google, engineers are royalty at Google, and they build what they want to build, and they launch it, and then they go on and build other things. And it was really hard to say that process had not worked because Google had become this massively successful company. But there were indications that growth was slowing. They had really grown quickly on the backs of the mobile surge, where everyone had just started going mobile at the time, and mobile handsets were growing and growing and growing, but it had saturated. And we were starting to see growth tailing off. So the historical approach, we'll just build cool stuff that our engineers dream up, and it tends to be quite useful, needed to change. And that's where the growth function came in about, we need to go back and iterate on some things that you've already built. And a lot of people did not like that, running experiments and so on. And I had a meeting. This was interesting. I started off working with search, Google search, and there was a meeting that the engineers pulled together and called me and said, hey, we'd like to just talk to you about some of the concerns we have about this growth function that was recently created and you were brought in and you're supposed to be leading it. If we're focusing on getting more users to do more searches, we think we're taking our eye off the ball. Our users don't care about how many other users are using Google. So we're focusing on what Google wants, not on what the user wants. So these growth metrics are dangerous because we're no longer focusing on the user, we're focusing on ourselves. And I thought that was an interesting viewpoint. And they said, so we shouldn't be doing this. Where we eventually got to was, I said, okay, well, what's your approach that you would prefer? And they said, we just build things that we believe are going to be useful, and the ones that are useful get used, and the ones that aren't useful don't get used. And I said, okay, and if what you're doing is good, meaning it's adding value to the users, how do you know that? They said, oh, well, they'll use it more. More people will use it. And I said, and how do you know more people are using it? Well, we can measure that. And I said, and that's what growth is about. You are adding more value to the user when more users use it and they use it more often. So all I'm saying is we need to start having a structured way of measuring how successful we are at adding value to the user. And so that was a good shift in their mindset. And that was the big challenge there. And at ThoughtSpot, the big challenge is, how do we go from a traditional B2B company and sales model to a product-led growth sales model? And some of the challenges there are, does that mean we don't need a sales team anymore? No, it doesn't at all mean that. In fact, what we're trying to do is just have the sales team be more highly leveraged, that the people they talk to are much warmer and more qualified leads. And does it mean we don't need customer success anymore? No, it doesn't mean that either. It just means you're trying to scale what customer success can do by taking some of their learnings and putting it back into the product. So 3 very different challenges, but they've all been very exciting.
Yeah, I think that example, how you turned around the situation and made them realize, oh, actually, that's what we're trying to do, is very important. And what I take from what you said is there is a bit of fear with that new trend of like driving growth. There is fear, from the salespeople, what is going to be my role? From the product managers, oh, you're taking my product away. From the designers, like frustrated, oh, that's the designer wanted, but I didn't get to do it. And it's about clarifying what the goal is, but it's the right thing to do, and bringing everybody together to make them understand that their role is not being taken away at all. Actually, they can do it better.
Yeah, we're trying to help them be more effective. Like at ThoughtSpot, we're trying to make sure the salespeople can sell more, close more deals with less effort than they ever have before.
So in this podcast, there is also a section where there is a PM asking you a question. So in this instance, this is Adi Chand, who is a product manager at ThoughtSpot. So let's hear the question.
Hey Ken, this is Adi from Growth Team at ThoughtSpot. My question for you is this: how is the role of a product manager evolving, and what does that mean in terms of the skills that a product manager needs to have in order to be successful?
That's a really good question. Touched on some of the things in terms of what PMs, how the core PM role has evolved and what growth PM is about, and success metrics and so on. The way I think I would summarize that is, there's a mindset change, and then there are some skills that go along with that. The mindset change, I think the biggest thing for all product managers is we need to move away from focusing on launching features as our measurement of how successful we are, and instead measure your impact by moving a success metric, defining what is the change in behavior or change in revenue or change in whatever important metric you have for your business or your particular feature. measure your success based on the success metric moving, not just how many features did I launch in my product area. So that's the big mindset change. And going along with that, that means there's two skills that have become much more important than they ever have been. 10 years ago, they weren't even discussed that much in PM. And that's the ability to do analysis, first of all, because you need to understand your success metric, what moves it. First of all, is it moving? And whether it's in positive or negative direction, what's moving it? So I really need to start asking those questions and using data a lot more about how my product is being used to help drive my future roadmap. And then the second part that goes along with that as well is becoming familiar with a very powerful tool for all PMs, which is running experiments. Historically, we've built things and we've launched them, and they either worked or they didn't. And oftentimes we didn't even really measure that much because we were just focused on it's launched. So not only do you need to measure and analyze the results, but becoming familiar with the way to run experiments. And they can be super simple. You can get very advanced, but the notion is I'm going to launch this feature to a subset of my users and compare them randomly selected. And there are sometimes challenges in even doing that, but just understanding the concept of I'm going to take one group and they're going to get a new version of the feature, and the other group is going to stay with the old version of the feature. And now I can compare between those two whether what I've just introduced is helping or hurting. Because unsurprisingly, a lot of things we launch actually have negative impact, but we've never really looked at that historically. 10 years ago, when I was at Oracle a few decades ago, product managers, it wasn't something we looked at. It really wasn't. So I would say the mindset, focus on the success metrics and make sure that you familiarize yourself and make sure you have access to tools and insights that you can use to understand how your feature works, how users use it, and figure out how you can run experiments to actually see whether your ideas are working in a positive or negative way.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much for both tips. So I like to finish the podcast on something a bit more fun. So I'm going to make you several propositions and you pick one of them.
Okay.
You can elaborate on it if you want to. So first one is ThoughtSpot, Google, or Facebook.
Okay. Well, it's like I have 3 children. Which one do I love the most? I really loved working at Facebook. This was a long time ago. It was like 10 years ago. And we had a vision of we were going to help the world. And I think that has not quite panned out in recent years, and Google, just such an exciting group of people who are incredibly smart. But Facebook and Google, as much as I love them, ThoughtSpot is my favorite. You were probably expecting me to say that anyway, but I have actually been involved with the company as an advisor since they were formed. And I watched them and worked with them. And I think the things that I love so much about the company are the people and the purpose, our mission of enabling everyone to use analytics, because that's something I've been just so passionate about. So really the reason I like it the most is it gives me a chance to realize something I've been passionate about, personally very, very passionate about.
Great. And you've had the opportunity to work in those companies because you moved to California from New York. So New York City or Palo Alto?
Oh, that one's fairly easy for me. Definitely Palo Alto. I originally came out here. I was a New Yorker, and I thought I was always going to be a New Yorker. And I came out here just because I thought Californians were a little bit crazy, and I wanted to experience that craziness while I was young. And my plan was 2 years in Palo Alto, and then I'll go back to New York. That was a few decades ago, so didn't quite work out that way. But look, New York City is super fun. But I think the thing that I realized when I came out here is there's no such thing as downtime in New York City. It's the city that never sleeps. The people in it never sleep either. That's super exciting, but you never get to just relax and enjoy where you are. That's my experience. So I love visiting there, but living there, I found I just couldn't get any downtime.
I agree. I've been living for 3 months in New York, and I'm going back to London in 10 days. And I'm like, okay, I need some rest.
Yeah. Love the city, but it takes a certain energy level that I had maybe when I was right out of college that just right now I want more downtime.
Right. The final one, we need to explain for the audience because although you've explained what ThoughtSpot is, they may not know. So a live board is basically, don't listen to that. It's basically a dashboard, except it's a live connection. And dashboards are dead, but basically dashboards or the search functionality that you've talked about, which is a Google. So live boards or search.
I'm going to cheat here on this one, but I'll explain why I'm cheating. And I'm going to say both. Live boards, I tried to not listen when you said live boards are just dashboards. That was a funny comment. Yeah, I mean, they definitely appear like like dashboards, but we call them live boards, because they're connected to live data. But much more than that is users are intended to change them. They're not static. So they're live in the sense that you are expected to make your own version of it. Unlike traditional dashboards where an analyst creates it and presents it to you. And if you want changes, you ask the analyst to make the change. These are here, they're giving you something that's more of a starting template. And you are expected to explore, maybe make your own versions of things, add to it on your own. So that's why I love live boards. But the reason I said both, the way you explore the things on the live board and create a new version of it that's more tailored to your specific question is through search. So live boards without search, I think live boards are the core of the power that we have, but live boards without search aren't live boards. They're just dashboards. So that's why I said both. I would go with live boards, but live boards require search to be live and to allow you to tailor it. So that's my answer there. Great.
And if people are curious of what a live board is, then there is a free trial, so you can actually go on.
Yes, there is. You can anyone can sign up for a free trial on our website and experience what live boards are about yourself.
Great. So if listeners want to contact you after this episode, what should they do?
You can just email me directly. I'll give you my personal email. It's just ken.rudin, that's RUDIN, @gmail.com. Very simple. And I would love to hear from people who have thoughts, comments, questions, suggestions, whatever.
Perfect. Thank you very much. It's very fun. And I've learned a lot as well.
Well, thank you again for inviting me. And I loved your questions and I enjoyed being part of this.
Thank you everyone for taking the time to listen to this podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode and that it has enabled you to understand your stakeholder and inspired you to better work with them to make successful products. If so, please share the link with your friends and colleagues. And if you want to suggest some topics, some guests, if you have questions you'd like me to ask during the interviews, or if you have any feedback, you can write to me at magalipellissier@hotmail.fr.